Welcome to today's Explainer. We're shifting the spotlight today, away from the famous leaders, the Churchills, the Roosevelts, the Stalins. Instead, we're going to dive right into the strangest, most highly impactful, and honestly, the most unconventional fighters on the ground during World War II. We're looking past the pristine command tents and focusing on the men and, well, in one case, not a man at all, who were out there actually kicking their feet in the mud. Let's get into it. So, here's our roadmap. Today, we're exploring 6 wildly different stories that really swing across the entire emotional and moral spectrum of the war. The one-man army, the Black Baron, the Auschwitz infiltrator, Mad Jack's War, the Soldier Bear, and finally the Scarface Commando. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the one-man army, focusing on Leo Major's solo campaigns. So picture this. Leo Major was this absolutely fearless Canadian scout operating right after D-Day. And get this, he famously fought with an eye patch after losing his eye to white phosphorus gas. He literally shrugged it off, saying he looked like a pirate. He even refused a prestigious military medal because he thought the general offering it, Montgomery, was totally incompetent. But the crucial point to understand about Leo is this staggering number, 93. That's 93 armed German soldiers that Major captured entirely by himself. How? Well, on a single scouting mission, he boldly bluffed that a massive Canadian army was waiting just outside the village, ready to completely obliterate them if they didn't surrender. The bluff worked perfectly, and Leo marched almost 100 armed men back to Allied lines completely solo. And that brilliantly illustrates what is easily his greatest feat. To prevent the massive Dutch city of Zwolle from being completely leveled by Allied artillery, Leo volunteered to scout it at night. Tragically, right at midnight, his scouting partner Wilfred was killed, but Leo, he pushed on alone. Through the early morning hours, he single-handedly orchestrated this methodical campaign of chaotic noise. We're talking throwing grenades, firing weapons randomly all over the place, and he even managed to burn down the German Gestapo headquarters. By tricking the remaining soldiers into believing a massive, full-scale attack was underway, he somehow secured the entire city by 6 a.m. He contacted the local resistance and basically saved Zwolle from total destruction. Just an unbelievable one-man wrecking crew. Shifting gears from absurd heroism to a terrifying kind of mechanical lethality, let's look at Section 2, the Black Baron, Michael Whitman's lethal efficiency. Now, operating a heavy Tiger I tank was a complex, intensely claustrophobic nightmare. It required absolute synchronization from a highly specialized crew of 5 guys. You had Michael as the commander, calling out targets and strategy. Bobby the gunner, who operated the massive 88mm cannon with these precise foot pedals and cranks. Eugene the loader, rapidly dropping heavy 20-kilogram shells, that's over 40 pounds, into the breach. Sepp, the driver, navigating this massive 14-ton beast using dual levers. And finally, Heinrich, the radio operator, managing comms and the front machine gun. They literally had to function as a single, flawless organism to survive. And when you look purely at the data, the results were devastating. Whitman's crew achieved a massive, ruthless kill count on the Eastern Front against the Soviets, destroying 119 tanks and 132 anti-tank guns in just a single year. But his most notorious event actually happened on the Western Front at Villers-Bocage. Whitman ambushed an entire British column. He took his single operational Tiger tank and drove it straight into the enemy forces. He systematically devastated a whole line of Cromwell's, Sherman's, and half-tracks before finally retreating. It still marks one of the most stunning armored engagements of the entire war. Okay, we're moving into some profoundly harrowing territory now. Section 3, the Auschwitz infiltrator, Witold Pilecki's secret war. In 1940, Polish officer Witold Pilecki did the unthinkable. He voluntarily allowed himself to be arrested. Why? So he could infiltrate the Auschwitz concentration camp. Once he was inside that nightmare, Pilecki actually established a highly organized underground resistance network called ZOW. And they didn't just sit there, they launched covert operations that struck directly at the Nazi war machine from within its darkest core. They were doing things like loosening bolts on manufactured machinery so it would constantly break down. Prison cooks were contaminating the food served to SS officers. And perhaps most importantly, they smuggled stolen medicine to sick inmates and gathered absolutely critical intelligence reports. Pilecki successfully smuggled out these detailed reports about the atrocities in the gas chambers, giving the world its very first real look inside. He begged the Allies to bomb the camps or the railways, anything to stop the machine. But his desperate pleas were tragically ignored by the Allies. Eventually, Pilecki realized that an internal uprising without outside help would just end in a total massacre. So in 1943, he orchestrated a completely daring escape to personally deliver his findings. But sadly, the bombing he begged for, it never came. To really show how this conflict brought out incredibly diverse personalities, let's switch things up and move to Section 4, Mad Jack's War, and his eccentric bravado. This is the story of a British soldier named Jack Churchill. This is a guy who famously stated that he, quite frankly, enjoyed the war. Visually striking and entirely absurd, Jack completely rejected modern military doctrine. I mean, instead of a standard-issue rifle, Mad Jack charged enthusiastically into battle playing his bagpipes, wielding a Scottish broadsword, and carrying a traditional longbow. Actually, he scored the only confirmed archery kill of the entire Second World War during the events of Dunkirk. He really proved that sometimes absolute audacity is a completely valid tactic all its own.
Now, prepare yourselves for a reality check that is both heartwarming and just totally bizarre. Section 5, The Soldier Bear, Private Wojtek.
So while roaming the Middle East, the Polish Second Corps, which was a group of soldiers who had basically fought their way out of a fallen Poland, adopted an orphaned Syrian brown bear cub. Now, the British had these strict transport rules that forbade pets on ships headed to Italy. So what did the Polish troops do? They officially enlisted the bear into the army as a private, complete with a paybook and a serial number. And compared to a standard private eating boring military rations, Wojtek's diet famously consisted of fruit, honey, and occasionally beer and cigarettes. But listen, he wasn't just a mascot. During the incredibly grueling Battle of Monte Cassino, Wojtek physically carried heavy 25-pound artillery shells up the rocky hills to supply the gunners. He became this absolute icon of morale and brute strength for the unit. Finally, we're going to wrap things up with some real-life espionage and thriller reality in Section 6, the Scarface Commando, Otto Skorzeny's espionage. Otto Skorzeny was this towering SS commando, and you could easily recognize him by this massive fencing scar running right down his face. In 1943, he pulled off his absolute most audacious operation. The Italian government had imprisoned Benito Mussolini in a remote mountaintop resort. So, Skorzeny's team landed on this jagged plateau using completely silent, unpowered gliders. It was like something out of a movie. They sprinted to the hotel, and without firing a single shot, Skorzeny bluffed the Italian guards into surrendering by screaming that a massive German army had them surrounded. Then he basically crammed Mussolini into this tiny crop duster plane right on the edge of the mountain and successfully evacuated him. Just a flawless extraction. Skorzeny was essentially a master of psychological warfare and tactical chaos. Take the Battle of the Bulge, for example. He launched Operation Griffin, where he dressed his German soldiers in captured American uniforms and jeeps just to flip road signs and cause utter paranoia across Allied lines. He also attempted a daring glider raid to capture the Yugoslav partisan leader Tito, missing him by mere minutes, by the way. And he even orchestrated the kidnapping of the Hungarian regent's son solely to force Hungary to stay aligned with the Axis powers. But here's what you really need to take away from this guy: his unbelievable post-war resume. Despite everything he did, he was actually acquitted by the Allies in 1945. He later escaped a denazification camp and fled to a pretty luxurious life in Spain. But his expertise in sabotage, it made him incredibly valuable during the Cold War. By 1952, he was actually training the Egyptian army at the behest of the CIA, and later, in this bizarre twist of fate, he acted as a secret informant for Israel's Mossad to track down other former Nazi scientists. You literally cannot make this stuff up. So, looking back at this incredible spectrum of war, from a bold Canadian scout liberating an entire city solo, to a heroic Polish officer voluntarily infiltrating a death camp, to a beer-drinking bear carrying artillery shells, and finally, an untouchable commando playing all sides in the Cold War, it really leaves us to ask one final question. If history is largely written by the victors, how many other unbelievable, stranger-than-fiction realities are still hiding right there in the shadows of the past, just waiting to be explained? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.